Hi, and welcome to Strategy. This is a video where we're going to go over the simulation round one, and I just want to talk about this graphic here on the blackboard where if you see strategy is in the center, but what we're doing here is we're trying to have a growth business where we're growing our sales, our revenues and profits. We're looking to have success, teamwork in some cases, planning, goal setting, competition, operations, vision, marketing, finance. You can see how a lot of these topics are wrapped up into the simulation. And the simulation is really our application of our learning experiences in strategy and learning about strategy and trying to actually do some strategy in the simulation and making it more experiential type of exercise. And if we go into assignments here, let's go into assignments, and we see that we have things that you have been working on are the discussion boards, and I'll be grading these on Monday or Tuesday. Week one case, which I'll be just grading also on probably Tuesday. It's due Sunday. In this case, remember that you don't have to write this up as a full essay format. You can just say, case one, Costco, question one, and then answer the question. But I do expect you to use information you're learning from the chapter, information from the case itself, and some outside references as well from other articles, books, or perhaps websites. So you write this up in a professional, graduate level manner, properly citing your references. So if you put in, for example, if you say Costco has X millions of dollars of sales, well, you need to have referenced where you got that number from. So you can't just make numbers up about profit margins or sales or things like that without citing where your source is. So I know exactly where you're getting this information from. So if you're reading an article or some other source that's going to enhance the answers to your questions, can't be 100% your opinion. They have to have some kind of research element to them to really solidify your points. And I did under course documents, I did leave a student example case study, and this example gives you basically, you want to put your name, the case, the class, the case number, the case name, and then question one, you can type out even the full question, and then you put your answer, and you put your citations in where you have some sort of information that you're providing from a different source, and then at the end you have a reference list that's properly cited, that goes along with your citations. Now your responses aren't, this McDonald's case is 12 pages. I'm not expecting a 12 page, but I'm expecting you to use enough words to answer each question completely with, looking for your personal opinion, information from the chapter and case, and some outside information of other articles or other reference points to complete your question. Okay. And I will provide feedback upon grading. And I do have a rubric where when you are putting this case together, you should look at, there is a rubric, I believe you can find it here, view rubric, when you click on the class. So I have a view rubric, and a rubric is a guide to what I'm looking for when I'm grading the case. So here, paper is well organized, well presented, strong visual appeal, good formatting, grammar, headlines, research was outstanding, more than 3 sources. That's per case, per chapter case, and then you're citing properly. That your writing is interesting, engaging, professional, grammatically correct. Topics were covered from each of the questions, and it wasn't a fluff piece. It was actually pretty well put together. And so if you do above average, you get the full score for each of these categories. And if you do average or below average, so that's how I'm kind of grading you on this poor to above average scale. So I'm going to fill out the rubrics for the case, and then you get an idea of how you perform, so then you can kind of review that and change your performance for the next case so as to improve that score. Okay, and then finally, so those are the 2 things you probably finished up with the discussion boards. You're working on the cases, and we also have the simulation, which is what we're going to discuss today. So if you remember from assignments, if you go to the, not assignments, and go to announcements, and I go down to the simulation, here every Friday it looks like we're going to be doing a round of the simulation, and it's 15 points of the grade. Everybody signed up, they joined the class code, created a team. You need to get over 2,500 points to get the full grade for the simulation. And here I wrote down that the text boxes or reflective observations are not required in the simulation. So I've seen some teams fill out these reflective observations. You do not have to do that. The class is too short to really worry about that each round. So that is not something you have to do in the simulation. So I did email this to everybody, and that's one thing you don't have to do is those reflective observations. Okay, so let's head on over to the simulation. And here I have the information for round one. So let's look at round one review. So current points for round one, we have new cars at work, 1,200 points. And this percentile rank means that you performed at a 90, almost a 99 percentile, meaning you beat 99% of the previous 5,000 teams that have played this simulation. Sort of like a percentile rank you would see on a SAT or GMAT score. And we had a number of teams at 90%. We had, let's see, about 5 teams above 90%, so excellent scores. In the first round, it's easy to score high the first round because you're coming off an inept, terrible management in year zero that was fired. So usually round one people score pretty well, and if you scored over 500 points or even over 600 points in round one, which most teams did, you did fine. If you scored under 600 points, you need to really reevaluate what your team is doing and look at this, play some practice rounds, watch my videos, and get a better sense of what you're doing here because you're falling way behind. So gross profit margins is where it's at. When companies announce earnings, investors want to see increases in gross profit margins. So how do you know what the gross profit margins were? Well, if you go into the simulation, here's my practice game. In year zero, the profit margins were 40%, and anybody could have gone into the into the financial tab here and took sales, gross profits divided by sales to get that calculation. And this is something that you've learned in finance, in financial accounting. So financial ratios are nothing new to you in this course, but you could see that in round one here. Round zero, to beat round zero numbers is pretty easy. This is my demo. I got higher gross operational and net profit margins, higher revenues, higher operating returns, higher return on equity, higher earnings per share, higher market capitalization, higher book share, and better forecasts, which led me to in my demo, I got 1,200 points. So you have to beat, so when I go into year two, I have to beat year one's information. So now I'm competing against myself on my financial ratios, as well as the competitors in the simulation. So keep that in mind when you're playing the sim, that you have to do better than last year. So whatever your gross profit margins are, you have to do better, because that's what investors are expecting in the real world and in the simulation. And stock price goes up along with increases in earnings per share. And so if the company that generally has the highest net profit margin and gross profit margin typically has the highest stock price, but not always. Return on equity, this is your return on the equity dollars invested in the company. Total points. So this next round, we're going to have round one added to round two. So total points are cumulative, and this is where I'm looking for you to score up to 2,500 points to get an A in the project. Operating margins are looking at how efficient you are with your advertising, and earnings per share, of course, is your earnings divided by outstanding shares. Return on equity is your profits in relationship to the size of your assets, so you don't want to overly inflate your assets. And net profit margin is how well you manage your debt and what remains of your profits after all your operational costs. Revenues per share, look at your outstanding shares and revenues. Total asset turnover, look at your assets, how much sales your assets generate in your assets become into sales. So if you have $1 million worth of assets and you have 1.85 million in sales, your total asset turnover will be 1.85. Okay, so that's just a little look at this scoreboard, how the teams have done. And a number of teams have done very well, showing that you know the simulation pretty good. So if we let's look at the charts for round one. So here is the round one information. So if we go by net profits per team, we see that new cars at work had the highest net profits, followed by dental cars, and then I guess third would be either Precision Motorworks or Powell Motors, 54.2, 54.6. Okay, this would be second place. So the teams that need to really reevaluate what they're doing on net profits would be RAC, Skirt Motors, Elite Motors, and Gem Auto. These are low, you have a low scale. So this kind of easily, you could find your team has a color, or you can hover over the teams and you can see how your team performed in net profit margin. So this is the most important category. The team with the highest net profit margins usually is the team winning the simulation. If we look at points per team, again, new cars at work have the highest points per team, and generally the people with the companies with the highest net profits, operational profits, gross profits have the highest points. Not always, but usually. So everybody made points, which is great, but you want to be more like these top teams that are over 1,000 points for the round. And you'll never be able to get 1,000 points a round again. That's only really round one you can do that. And remember, you're trying to get an average of 2,500 points. So you don't have to, if you score 300, 400 points, you're doing good in most rounds. Except round one. Round one, you should be able to score pretty high. And we have stock price. We have almost $20 stock price that we're setting at. And everybody, even at the very bottom, increased their stock price from the starting point of 5. So this company did okay, increased their stock price, made profits. But some companies were able to compete at a much higher level. And that's where you want to get to, where these three top companies are doing in stock price. If we look at sales per team, the number one team in sales is not the number one team in points or number one team in profits, and that's okay. Sales are important, but they're not everything. You know, if I wanted to make, I can easily make a company today and be number one in sales in any industry. So if I wanted to be number one auto manufacturer with number one in sales, I would just create an auto manufacturer company. Maybe I'd make a sedan or a truck, and I'd sell it for $5,000 a piece. But it cost me $15 or $20,000 to build the car, so I'm selling every car at a loss. But since the cars are such a huge value, everybody would buy them, and I would have number one in sales, but I would be certainly bankrupt in 3 months because I'm selling everything at a loss. So getting top sales is easy, but turning those sales into profits is the trick. If we look at earnings per share, we have new cars at work at the highest earnings per share, and followed by, so these are really the top three companies, and that's really, you know, your earnings divided by outstanding shares. And this is just a market share. So we have a lot of companies competing here, so it's a highly competitive. So let me go over to the demo and show you. Now I'm in round 2 of the demo. So the first thing I would do, this is what you should do if you're moving in, everyone's moving into round 2, is review your overview points. So now this is the demo, of course, or a practice game. You need to do this in the real team competition, but you can use the practice games to kind of work out some questions or details or strategy. So, you know, so what I would do here is I'd look to see, okay, where did I lose some points? My debt ratio, so I took on some extra, actually I lowered my debt ratio, so I made some points here. My profit margins all went up, and that translated into points. My total asset turnover, only my equity multiplier was a little flat, but everywhere else I seemed to make points in growing the company, and my forecasts were better, and I had invested in the operations, and I had a surplus, so I made 1,200 points, which is outstanding. But if you want to know how you did more individually, you could look at this assessment tab. So here it gives you a star rating, it gives you a score, which is your actual score, percentile rank, and your performance, and then information on how to improve your performance. So if you want to know how did I do in a simulation, here you go. You have a self-assessment where you can go into every category and you could review with hints, with different metrics of stars and scales and percentiles and words on how you did. So this you need as a must review to see how you did in the simulation. Charts we kind of already reviewed, but I think an important chart is this performance chart, where you want to go here and you want to go to the bottom of this performance chart and see, here's my market potential and my sales. And my market potential was greater than my actual sales because I only built 2,500 cars, but I could have sold 2,800 cars. So when I'm forecasting again, I want to look at not what I sold last round, but what my potential was, and grow that potential. So I underbuilt to my potential. So here, you know, I only made 2,000 cars. I could have sold 2,356 cars. That means that extra 356 cars went to another competitor. So this is an area where I've got to do better and not lose sales to competitors. So when I'm redoing the simulation here, I can also look at the industry tab for what my competitors did, what were their market potential, how did they build their cars. And so I can get a lot of industry details here. Just like any public company can look at other public companies, see how they performed last year. I can review my financials, and I'm back into sales. So I notice that the customer expectations have gone up, and I'm going to build my car and say, okay, this is important, so I'm going to make that high. This is not important, so let me make that low. Oh, there's a limit to where I could go, so let me just make that low. So here again, I am eyeballing what's important to my customers when I'm building the car out, and I'm noticing here that my profit margin is low. So if I go back to, where my profit margins were on the overview, I need to get my gross profit margin back up to 58%. So in sales, I might have to increase prices. I might have to lower costs to try to get that up. Now I could see here my last year's sales were 2,000, but I remember from here that it was more like 23, and the growth rate of this, according to the student user guide, the student user guide is usually at the bottom of most manuals, of most pages. I go to the student user guide and I see that the economy has a growth rate of 25%. So I need to use that information when I'm rebuilding my simulation to say, to get a better idea of what my sales could be. So don't copy these numbers I'm putting in here. I'm just, I'm just slamming some numbers in here to get this done. So don't copy me per se, but I'm going to try and build out so I'm just quickly throwing some numbers in here. But the idea is that I should have a higher profit margin. So if I look at, and again, I want to keep eye on my sales. So I was actually pretty close to 2,000 in some of these categories. So maybe I want to go higher. But you have to also weigh the benefits and the costs here, because if I go higher, that means my capacity utilization isn't as good, because now I'm going to have a factory with some unused vehicles. And so I can tamper with this to try to get a higher profit margin. And then you go into advertising and you have to try to figure out, okay, advertising is going to change. We have a scale here. The scales have gone up of what the advertising market's going to be, because the economy for these companies have grown, so they have more money to spend in advertising. So I just got to make sure I don't overspend and develop demand I can't meet. I don't want to estimate and lose sales. So it takes some strategy here. I'm going to just pause this while I do this because it takes too long, and then I move right into production. So now I'm in production, and I see that with my forecast here, I'm going to have to buy some plants, and this is going to lower my capacity utilization in the 2 plants I'm buying. Well, this one actually I'm meeting 100% of my capacity, because my capacity is 3,000. I'm building 3,000. The same thing here. Here I'm only building 2,500, so I'm not using my full 3,000% capacity. But here I am. Okay, so I'm pretty efficient with my assets here. Now, this is the investments. I have to, I'm going to invest more in my company, because what do I get for these investments? Well, I get, if I invest in robotics, of course, I get to lay off some people, and I get to build robotics. Each level will reduce my cost by $300 per car. So I have 6 levels now, so that's going to reduce my overall cost structure per car. Now remember, you don't have to fill out these reflective observations in the short summer session. It's something I do when we have a longer semester. Now, another thing I'll look at is where those operational cost reductions. They're here on the screen, but you don't get them the same round you buy them. It takes a year before they're actually land and make it efficient. So here I have a $43 million surplus. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and I'm going to buy back some stock with that surplus. and that will reduce my amount of outstanding shares, and maybe I can buy back some debt to reduce my debt burden, and this will help my points. So my debt scores will go up. If I'm reducing my outstanding shares, that'll help my outstanding. That will make all my per share variables better because I have less shares to divide things by. Okay, so I'm going to finish this year 2, and then that pops me into year 3, which I'll complete next review. But what I want to look at here is my points. So I see that my points are only 300, which isn't uncommon. Now, that's actually pretty well for the second round because it's hard. And the biggest mistake that I make from round 1 to round 2 is I did not get my gross profit margins higher than the previous round, so I've lost points. That ripples through a lot of metrics here, because if I don't increase my profit margins, I'm not increasing my returns on assets, on equity. I'm probably going to be pulled behind in a lot of categories. So why wasn't I able to get my profit margins up? Well, last round 1 I had very high profit margins, so that made it difficult. And I didn't have enough cost reductions. You'll see now that I'm in round 3, my cost reductions jumped from 600 to 1800, which will help me to get higher profit margins. So some rounds, when you're heavily investing, it may be a difficult round to earn a lot of points, and that's okay because you're company building, so in the next round you'll be able to get those points up. But remember, it gets more competitive every round because every round customer expectations increase and competitiveness between companies increase and advertising costs increase. So you are trying to manage these as best as you can moving forward. And also if we go back to the announcements, I have an announcement here of Zoom simulation round hints, how to increase your score. So here I say, when you design the cars, make sure that you're above the 40% profit margin. You're increasing your profit margins 2 to 5% every round. You're not overspending on production plants. You're not buying production plants you don't need. You're not having a low capacity utilization. You're investing in operational investments to increase your profit margins. You're reading over the student user guide. You're playing individual practice rounds. You're trying to remember that you're focused on maximizing shareholders' wealth, improving those profit margins. And you're clicking on your assessment tab to review your performance. So here are my hints on how to do better. Okay, so this is my quick review of round 1. I hope you found a lot of helpful hints to improve your score moving into round 2. And remember, if you scored over 900 points, round 2 is going to be a little difficult. If you're shooting for 400 points in round 2 because you did so well in round 1, and you're competing against, in a sense, over your performance from round 1 to 2, and you're always trying to keep your competitors at bay in your market share, it can be hard. But if you scored under 500 points in round 1, you should be able to score better in round 2 because now you're competing against a weak performance in round 1. So just keep those in mind. Okay, thanks for your time, and I hope you found this helpful and you're enjoying the class. Continue doing an excellent job. Talk to you soon.